the first time you saw Cary Grant? What was your reaction?
Have you ever been hit by a stun gun? It was, oh my goodness,
Really?
Can anyone be this beautiful? Can anyone be this charming? Can anyone be this electric? It was when he walked into a room, the room changed. He had it. He had that presence.
At 82 years old, Cary Grant finally made a confession that stunned people. She was the great love of his life. Cary Grant, born Archibald Alexander Leach on January 18, 1904, in Bristol, England, didn't come from glamour or privilege. His early years were filled with pain, struggle, and emotional scars that stayed with him for life. When he was just 9 years old, his mother Elsie was taken to a mental institution, and his father hid the truth from him for years, telling him she had simply gone away. That heartbreak cut deep. It shaped the private side of Grant, adding a quiet sadness and emotional depth that later made his performances feel so powerful and real. As a young man, he escaped into movement, discipline, and performance. Joining Bob Pender's troupe of acrobats changed everything. Touring with the group sharpened his grace, timing, and precision, while teaching him the discipline that would define his career. This wasn't just stage training, it was survival. And it built the man the world would come to admire. When Grant moved to America in the early 1920s, he arrived with ambition and little else. Hollywood didn't hand him fame, he crafted it himself. After signing with Paramount Pictures, he carefully transformed into Cary Grant, refining his accent, perfecting his posture, and building that smooth, magnetic image people couldn't resist. But behind that effortless charm was a man working relentlessly behind the scenes. He studied scripts obsessively, pushed for creative control, and made bold moves long before actors usually dared to do that.
He was another one of those guys that was a very distinctive personality on the screen, probably never got as much credit as he deserved, but he was one of the kings of doing that sort of thing, that romantic comedy.
The polished icon on screen hid a sharp, driven force who was always shaping his own legend. By the mid-1930s, Cary Grant had exploded into stardom, becoming one of Hollywood's most magnetic leading men.
Somewhere before. Funny how I have that effect on people. Cigarette?
No, thank you.
Audiences couldn't get enough of his mix of elegance, sharp humor, and quiet confidence. But what made Cary Grant truly stand out was his unbelievable versatility. He could slide from wild screwball comedy to sweeping romance to edge-of-your-seat suspense like it was nothing. In films like Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, and The Philadelphia Story, Grant wasn't just acting in these genres, he was helping redefine them.
In the book, you still describe him all these years later as delicious.
Yes, absolutely. I think I love him more now than I ever did.
His comic timing felt almost unreal, so sharp and natural it looked effortless, but there was serious intelligence behind every move, and what made him even more captivating, he wasn't afraid to be the joke. He let himself look flustered, vulnerable, even ridiculous, and somehow that made him even more irresistible. His chemistry with Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, and Irene Dunne was electric. Every scene crackled with tension, wit, and charm, creating performances people still study today. Then came his legendary work with Alfred Hitchcock, and this is where things got even more fascinating. In classics like Suspicion, Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and North by Northwest, Grant brought a cool, polished surface, hiding something darker underneath. Beneath the charm was tension, mystery, even danger. He became the ultimate Hitchcock hero, and the screen lit up every time he appeared. Charming yet possibly dangerous, trustworthy yet mysterious, that was the magic Cary Grant brought to the screen. He wasn't just playing leading men, he was changing what a leading man could be. Grant balanced light and darkness, humor and menace, in a way that felt effortless but was incredibly rare. One moment he could pull you in with charm, the next have you questioning everything beneath that polished smile. Even though he was nominated twice for the Academy Award for Best Actor, he never won a competitive Oscar, a shock many still call one of Hollywood's biggest snubs. But in 1970, the industry finally honored what audiences already knew, giving him an honorary Oscar for his extraordinary impact on cinema. By then, his legend was untouchable. Grant stepped away from acting in 1966 on his own terms, refusing to overstay his welcome. A bold move in Hollywood. Instead, he turned to business ventures and devoted himself to raising his daughter, Jennifer, whom he absolutely adored. But years before that, in the mid-1950s, at the peak of his fame, Grant made a move that stunned people in the industry. Restless with being just another leading man for hire, he founded his own production company, Granite Productions. That decision changed everything. It gave him creative control, more freedom, and the power to shape stories that matched his growing ambition, taste, and maturity. Under the Granite banner, Cary Grant helped bring to life some of the most polished and unforgettable films of his later years. These weren't random projects. They reflected his taste, his ambition, and his growing creative power. Among them was Indiscreet in 1958, a sparkling romantic comedy packed with wit, charm, and the effortless magnetism Grant made look so easy. Then came Father Goose in 1964, a warm and funny film that revealed a softer, more thoughtful side of his screen persona. It showed audiences there was even more depth behind the legendary charm. These films weren't just commercial plays, they were carefully chosen statements. Grant was pushing beyond the limits of traditional Hollywood stardom, building a legacy filled with quality, intelligence, and style. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was shaping something lasting. But even with all that professional success, an even bigger role was about to transform his life completely. In 1966, after the birth of his beloved daughter Jennifer, Grant made a decision that shocked many people close to him. He stepped away from motion pictures entirely, walking away from the glamour, praise, and pressures of Hollywood. And he did it for something he valued more, devoting himself fully to being a father, a role he embraced with real passion and pride. This wasn't a retreat caused by exhaustion or fading fame. It was a deeply personal choice driven by love and responsibility. Cary Grant was determined to give his daughter the stable, caring childhood he never had, and that meant more to him than anything Hollywood could offer. He embraced family life with the same discipline, elegance, and devotion that shaped his legendary career. And in doing that, he revealed something powerful. His greatest performance wasn't on a movie screen at all. It was in the quiet, uncelebrated role of being a devoted father. A role that became the most meaningful chapter of his life. But while Grant's private life held this softer side, his romantic life was every bit as captivating and dramatic as the characters he played. Across decades, his relationships made headlines and reflected both the glamour and emotional complexity of Hollywood's golden age. In 1942, at the height of his stardom, Grant married Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress and one of the richest women in the world. Their marriage instantly became one of the most talked-about unions of the era, a dazzling mix of movie star charm and staggering wealth that fascinated the public. And what made it even more surprising, though the marriage ended in divorce, it was notably free of bitterness. In a Hollywood world often filled with scandal and fallout, Grant and Hutton remained friends afterward, a rare twist that only added to the intrigue surrounding them. Even after their romance ended, the respect and affection between Cary Grant and Barbara Hutton remained strong. A rare thing in Hollywood and a real testament to their bond. Then, on Christmas Day in 1949, Grant married actress and writer Betsy Drake, beginning what many saw as one of the most intellectually connected relationships of his life. This wasn't just a glamorous pairing, there was real depth there. Drake shared Grant's interest in psychology, self-discovery, and personal growth, something that deeply drew them together. The two even appeared on screen together in Every Girl Should Be Married and Room for One More, giving audiences a glimpse of that chemistry. Their marriage marked a quieter, more thoughtful chapter for Grant. Less about headlines, more about understanding himself and growing in private. Though their connection ran deep, the marriage ended in August 1962. Closing a major chapter in his personal life. But Grant's next romance would send shockwaves through the press. On July 22, 1965, he eloped with actress Diane Cannon, who was more than 3 decades younger than him, and the headlines exploded.
In the mid-1960s, she married the legendary Cary Grant. Now, he was 61 at the time. She was just 28. The marriage lasted 3 years and produced a daughter, actress Jennifer Grant. The age difference we talked about. When you first started your relationship, did you think it would blossom into something else because of the age difference?
No, actually, I was younger. I was 23 when I met him.
Is that right? 23
Yes,
when you met him? 28 when you married him, 23 when you met him?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was older than my father, but that wasn't the big deal.
Their whirlwind romance fascinated the public and fed Hollywood's obsession with unlikely love stories. It was glamorous, unexpected, and impossible for the press to ignore.
And I loved in the beginning.
Yeah.
He changed the way I wore my hair, the way I dressed,
Right.
the way I wrote thank you notes, and I loved it because it garnered such attention from him to me. But right after he asked me to marry him, it changed.
Yeah.
But behind the excitement, the relationship was turbulent. The marriage faced intense strain, and by 1968 the couple divorced, ending a dramatic chapter that had captivated audiences far beyond the screen.
You divorced 3 years later. In the book, you still describe him all these years later as as delicious.
Yes, absolutely. I think I love him more now than I ever did.
Despite the challenges that marriage brought, it gave Cary Grant one of the most meaningful roles of his life, fatherhood. And that changed everything for him. Becoming a father reshaped his priorities, softened his outlook, and gave his later years a deeper sense of purpose. Then, on April 11th, 1981, Grant married Barbara Harris, a woman 47 years younger than him, in what would be his final marriage. But this was not some flashy celebrity romance grabbing headlines. This was something much more personal. After years of public fascination around his relationships, Grant seemed to be searching for peace, companionship, and real stability. And with Harris, many believed he finally found it. Away from the spotlight, Grant discovered a sense of privacy and calm that had often escaped him earlier in life. It brought his long, dramatic journey through love to a quiet and settled close. Taken together, these marriages reveal something deeper about the man behind the legendary image. Beneath the effortless elegance and smooth screen persona was someone constantly searching for connection, understanding, and lasting affection. His personal life was every bit as compelling as the iconic career that made him a legend, and then came the stunning confession. At 82 years old, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the image of polished charm had softened into quiet reflection, Cary Grant finally opened up about a truth he had kept guarded for decades. This was a man married 5 times, linked to some of the most admired women in the world, yet in the twilight of his life, he made a confession that surprised even people closest to him. A revelation that changed how some looked at his life forever. Cary Grant revealed there was one woman who stood above all the others, the great Italian actress Sophia Loren. For many, that confession was stunning. After all, Grant had long been the very image of romance on screen, making love seem graceful, playful, and almost timeless. But off-screen, his emotional world was far more complicated than people realized. Behind the charm and confidence, Grant often admitted he struggled with insecurity, fame, and relentless self-criticism. Those pressures made it hard for him to fully give himself to relationships. As Grant once admitted, "I spent much of my life pretending to be someone who had everything figured out, but the truth is, I was always searching for something or someone who made me feel whole." And according to Grant, that feeling arrived when he met Sophia Loren. Their paths crossed in the late 1950s while filming The Pride and the Passion in 1957, and something powerful sparked almost instantly. Grant was already a Hollywood legend, polished and admired around the world. Loren was a rising international sensation, radiating beauty, intelligence, and confidence that turned heads everywhere. From the moment they met, Grant felt something he had never experienced before, and that unexpected connection would become one of the most talked about emotional chapters of his life. "She didn't look at me as Cary Grant, the movie star," he recalled. "She looked at me as a man, flawed, human, and real." That realization shook him, as he admitted. "That terrified me, and it thrilled me at the same time." Grant was deeply drawn to Sophia Loren's authenticity. In a world filled with carefully crafted Hollywood images, she stood apart. She was unapologetically herself, passionate, disciplined, warm, and deeply rooted in her Italian identity. That was something he found impossible to ignore. As Grant put it, Sophia had a strength that didn't need to announce itself. She carried herself with dignity and fire, and I was completely undone by it. That wasn't casual admiration. That was something much deeper. He confessed he fell in love with her quietly, but intensely, even knowing circumstances stood in the way, and that made it even more powerful. At the time, Loren was devoted to producer Carlo Ponti, the man she loved deeply and would later marry. Grant understood her heart belonged elsewhere, and despite all his fame and confidence, he didn't try to force what could not be. "I knew she would never be mine," he said softly. "Loving her changed me. It showed me the kind of love that exists beyond possession." That's what made this story so striking. There was no bitterness, no resentment, no scandal, only admiration and gratitude. Grant believed the love endured precisely because it was never pushed into something impossible. As he reflected, "We didn't destroy what we felt by trying to force it into something it could never be. That's why it stayed pure in my memory." What a confession. Over the years, he would experience marriages, heartbreaks, and personal struggles, but he suggested this connection remained different from all the rest, not because it was fulfilled, but because it lived untouched, a love remembered not through loss, but through reverence. Yet Cary Grant said the emotional clarity he felt with Sophia Loren remained unmatched. In his later years, he often reflected on the difference between companionship and true connection, and his words carried a striking honesty. "I cared deeply for the women I married," he said, "but Sophia, she represented the love I understood too late, the love that asks for nothing, that simply exists." That wasn't a scandalous confession. It was something far more intimate, a truth he had carried in silence for years. Grant made clear he wasn't trying to rewrite history or diminish the women in his life. This was about acknowledging something deeper. And when he spoke of Sophia at 82, there was no bitterness in his voice, only tenderness. "If you are lucky," he said, "you meet one person in your life who shows you who you really are. For me, that was Sophia. She was the love of my life, even if she was never meant to be my wife." What a stunning admission. In those quiet words, the world glimpsed the man behind the legend, not the impeccably dressed star, but a thoughtful soul finally naming the love that had shaped his heart forever. Then came the final chapter. Cary Grant passed away on November 29, 1986, after suffering a massive stroke. And with his death, the world lost far more than a movie icon. It lost a symbol of elegance, wit, and timeless charm that seemed impossible to replace. He was 82 years old, yet even in his final years, he had not faded into the background. Far from it, he remained active, appeared at public events, and stayed warmly connected to the fans who had adored him for more than 5 decades. Even after stepping away from film, his presence still carried that rare magnetism people never forgot. His sudden passing came as a profound shock, made even more heartbreaking by the circumstances around it. Cary Grant was in Davenport, Iowa, preparing to give a talk as part of a national speaking tour, something that had become a meaningful part of his later years. These appearances gave him a chance to reflect on his extraordinary life, share stories from Hollywood's golden age, and show gratitude for a career beyond even his early dreams. The evening before his death, he attended a rehearsal dinner for the event, and by all accounts was in wonderful spirits, gracious, witty, and impeccably polite, just as people always remembered him. There was a tragic irony in it all, a man who seemed to embody vitality and sophistication taken so suddenly, with no chance for a final farewell. The massive stroke came without warning, a sobering reminder of how fragile life can be. Grant was rushed to St. Luke's Hospital, but despite every effort, he never regained consciousness. News of his passing spread fast, and grief poured in from around the world. Fans, actors, directors, and critics all mourned a man whose presence had shaped generations of cinema lovers. For many, it felt like the end of an entire Hollywood era. Cary Grant wasn't just a star, he was elegance, mystery, humor, and timeless charisma, wrapped into one unforgettable legend. And even decades later, his legacy still refuses to fade. But now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Sophia Loren was truly the great love of Cary Grant's life? Or was there another chapter of his story that moved you most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this with fellow classic film fans, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible Hollywood stories coming next.